Where do you think is the safest place? A remote research station, a quiet cabin in the woods, or a camping trip with friends? These three stories will make you question that and realize that true fear often doesn't come from where you expect. The chronicler's foreword. The following excerpts are taken from the personal journal of Elias Vance, a low-level systems technician during a winter stay at the Polaris VI Arctic Research Station. The entries have been edited for coherence. The real identities of the individuals involved have been changed. October 27th. This is my second month in what they call the long night. The sun set weeks ago and won't return until March. Outside, the temperature hovers at -40 degrees, and the wind howls through the station's metal struts with a mournful sound, like the cry of a trapped creature. I came here with romantic notions of solitude and scientific discovery. At 24, fresh out of college, this was my first full-time job, a chance to prove myself to do something meaningful before real life began. But the reality is far more mundane. Polaris VI Station, a technological marvel perched in the icy wilderness, is a bustling beehive of a few dozen scientists in the summer. But in the winter, it shrinks to a skeleton crew. There are only 4 of us. Dr. Aris Thorne, the station commander, a geologist with a salt and pepper beard and eyes that have seen too many Arctic winters. Lena Petrova, our doctor and biologist, a quiet Russian woman who seems to communicate more with her ice core samples than with people. And Ben Carter, the mechanical engineer, a big, jolly man whose laughter seems to be the only sound that can fill the station's immense emptiness. And then there's me, Elias, the computer kid. My job is mostly making sure the station's automated systems don't self-destruct. Most of the time I just sit here, staring at lines of green code, feeling like a redundant cog in a massive machine. The silence here is unlike any I've ever known. It's heavy, enveloping, making the space feel abandoned, even when people are in it. It's like a familiar family home that has suddenly become eerily empty, and every creak of the floorboards feels ominous. Tonight, the first strange thing happened. Around 2 a.m., a shrill alarm echoed through the station, a high, sharp beep that drilled straight into my skull. I bolted upright in my bunk, my heart pounding in my chest. Intruder alarm, specifically in sample storage bay C. I ran out of my room, just managing to pull on a sweatshirt. Ben stumbled out of the opposite room, his hair disheveled. "What the hell?" he grumbled. Aris and Lena were already in the central control room when we arrived. Aris was clacking away at a keyboard, his face lit by the screen's blue glow. "It's nothing," he declared after a moment. "A pressure sensor on the bay C door is malfunctioning, probably from the frost. I'll just disable it." He turned off the alarm. The silence returned, heavier than before, but something was off. I went to a secondary terminal and pulled up the system log. "Sir," I said, my voice hesitant, "it's not a sensor malfunction. The log clearly states that the alarm was manually triggered from the console inside bay C." Aris turned to look at me, his eyes narrowed. "That's absurd. All 4 of us are accounted for. Who could possibly be in there?" "I don't know," I admitted, "but that's what the system says." Lena peered over my shoulder, her face expressionless. "Perhaps an electromagnetic glitch, a system anomaly." Aris nodded, seemingly satisfied with that explanation. "That's it. Vance, you run a full system diagnostic in the morning. Now everyone back to bed." They left, but I stayed, staring at the screen. Polaris VI's system was state-of-the-art, shielded from all kinds of interference. It didn't produce anomalies like this. The thought kept circling in my head, a crazy notion I couldn't shake. That switch was flipped manually, which meant someone had been in there. November 1st. I spent the entire day running diagnostics. Nothing unusual. Everything was functioning perfectly. When I reported this to Aris, he just shrugged and told me to stop worrying about it. But I couldn't. That night I had trouble sleeping. I lay in bed, listening to the familiar sounds of the station, the low hum of the ventilation system, the distant click of the water generator. Around midnight, I heard another sound, a soft thump which seemed to come from the hallway. I held my breath, straining to listen. Maybe it was just the metal contracting in the cold. I almost convinced myself of that when I heard it again, this time closer. The sound of something dropping to the floor. Without making a sound, I sat up. My heart was a frantic drum in my chest, and a cold dread spread through my body, paralyzing me. I wanted to call out, but my throat was constricted. I lay there, utterly motionless, not because I couldn't move, but because I didn't want to. I didn't want to find out what was out there. Then, through the gap under my door, a dark shadow passed. It didn't move quickly, just a silent, purposeful glide. It didn't go toward the common area or the control room. It went upstairs, toward the unused observation deck. There was only one staircase leading up there and no other exits. My paralysis dissolved, replaced by a surge of adrenaline. As quietly as I could, I slid out of bed, grabbed my tablet, and pulled up the security camera system. I didn't dare turn on the lights. I scrolled through the feeds. The hallway was empty. The control room was empty. The lab was empty. But then I switched to the camera on the staircase leading to the observation deck, and I saw it. A figure was standing at the top of the stairs, their back to the camera. They just stood there, motionless, looking out the large window toward the icy wilderness. They were wearing a station-issued winter suit, the kind we all had, but something was terribly wrong. The way they stood, their absolute stillness, was unnerving. I watched for nearly an hour. The figure didn't move. November 2nd. I showed the footage to Aris and Ben in the morning. Ben went pale. Aris replayed the video over and over, his face grim. "The image quality is terrible," he said. "Can't make out who it is." "But it's someone," Ben said, his voice trembling. "Someone who isn't us. How did they get in? The station has been sealed since September." "It's impossible," Aris said definitively. "There has to be a logical explanation." He ordered a full station check, a meticulous search. We split up. Ben and I checked the technical areas and storage bays. Aris and Lena checked the labs and living quarters. We opened every locker, checked every nook, and shined lights into every dark space. Nothing. The station was utterly empty except for the four of us. We regrouped in the control room. The tension in the air was so thick you could cut it. "He's gone," Ben said, his voice laced with disbelief, like he vanished into thin air. "He has to be hiding somewhere," I insisted. "There are no exits." That's when Lena spoke, her voice level. "There is one. The maintenance hatch on the roof of the observation deck. It leads outside." We all looked at her. "But it's locked from the inside," Aris said, "and no one could survive out there for more than 10 minutes without proper gear." "We should check it anyway," Lena said. Aris reluctantly agreed. He and Ben suited up and went up there. Lena and I watched them on the cameras. We saw them fumbling with the hatch's bolt. A few minutes later, Aris's voice came over the radio, static and strained. "The hatch is unlocked from the inside." A silence descended on the control room. "Any footprints?" I asked over the radio. "No, the winds wiped everything clean," but Aris's voice trailed off. "There's this here." Through Aris's helmet camera, we saw him shine his flashlight on something on the metal surface of the roof. It was a small, black device, the size of a walkie-talkie, with a single red light blinking. It didn't look like any station equipment. Aris picked it up. There was a single switch on the side. "What the hell is that?" Ben asked. No one had an answer. November 5th. 3 days have passed in a haze of confusion and fear. We've locked the roof hatch and increased security, but the sense of being watched remains. We move in pairs, never alone. Trust has dissolved. Every unusual noise makes us jump. The black device sits on the table in the control room, an ominous object. No one dares to touch it. It's tangible proof that something or someone was with us toying with us. Last night I was in the control room doing some late-night work. The others had gone to bed. I was too anxious to rest. I was reviewing old system logs, looking for any abnormalities, anything I might have missed. And then I found it. A maintenance log from last winter. A report by a technician named Marcus Cole. He had reported unexplained audio anomalies in the intercom system, whispers, footsteps. His report had been dismissed as isolation fatigue. Marcus Cole. I remembered reading about him in the personnel files. He was one of last year's winter crew. He never made it back. The official report said he got lost in a blizzard during an outside survey trip. His body was never found. A cold dread ran down my spine. I turned to look at the black device on the table, and suddenly I recognized it. I had seen a similar design before, in an old technical manual. It was an experimental personal locator beacon, a type they had discontinued because it was unreliable. And I remembered another detail from Marcus Cole's file. He was an electronics hobbyist. He liked to build his own gadgets. The truth hit me like a punch to the gut, a horrifying realization that left me breathless. The manually triggered intruder alarm, the figure on the stairs, the hatch unlocked from the inside. There was no intruder, there never was. The person who triggered the alarm, who stood at the top of the stairs, who unlocked the hatch, was one of us. I slowly turned my chair. The hallway outside the control room was dark and silent, but I knew I wasn't alone anymore. The real horror wasn't that there was a stranger in our station. The real horror was that the stranger had been here all along, hidden behind a familiar face. I don't know which of the three it is. Aris with his stony composure, Lena with her inscrutable silence, or Ben, whose laughter now seems forced and hollow. But I know one thing. The long night still has 4 months left, and I'm trapped here with them. This event left a scar on me for years. Even now, in the safety of civilization, I can't shake that feeling. The sense that the safest places can harbor the deepest dangers, and sometimes, the monster you fear most is the one sleeping in the next room. And the craziest part is, if I hadn't been so curious about the system logs that night, if I had simply accepted the glitch explanation, maybe things would have ended very differently. Maybe I would never have known the truth. Or maybe I would never have had the chance to. Story 2. The Silent Guardians. For Elias Thorne, silence wasn't just golden, it was a sanctuary. After his PhD in art history became more of an expensive decoration than a ticket to a stable career, he found himself adrift in that limbo so familiar to many in their mid-20s. He wasn't a student anymore, but he wasn't quite a professional either. He was in the in-between, stuck in a life buffer zone where ambition was ravenous but opportunity was scarce. His dissertation, a painstaking study of pagan symbolism in Appalachian folk art, had been rejected by every publisher he sent it to. It was too academic, too niche, they said. The polite rejections felt like tiny daggers, whittling away at his self-confidence until there was nothing but a raw, rough core. That's why the woods called to him. Or rather, the cabin of his old mentor, Professor Alastair Finch, did. It was deep in the Monongahela National Forest, a structure of wood and stone nestled among ancient pines and hemlocks, an hour's drive from the nearest paved road. Alastair, an eccentric man with a Merlin-like beard, had offered to lend it to him for 6 months. "Go there, Elias," he'd said over the phone, his voice raspy with cigarettes. "No internet, no television, no distractions. Just you, your books, and the forest. Rewrite that book, make it undeniable." The offer felt like a lifeline, an escape from the oppressive air of his city apartment and the pitying glances of his parents, a chance to be productive, to reassert his worth. The first few weeks were a tonic. The clean, cold mountain air seemed to cleanse his mind. The silence wasn't empty but a profound stillness, broken only by the whisper of the wind through the towering trees and the distant cry of a hawk. The cabin, though rustic, was immensely cozy. It smelled of old pine and leather-bound books, a scent of history and solitude. Elias established a strict routine: wake at dawn, write until noon, hike in the afternoon, and spend the evenings reading by the fireplace. He felt himself reconnecting with a primal part of himself, a version of Elias that existed before the grinding years of academia. The unease began subtly. It was a Tuesday afternoon, about 3 weeks after he'd arrived. He was following a little-used trail to a babbling creek when he saw it. Perched on a mossy rock beside the path was a small figure, crudely carved from a twig. It was no taller than his hand, with no facial details, just the vague shape of a head and torso. There was something strange and deliberate about its placement. It wasn't a random piece of fallen wood. It had been placed there. Elias picked it up. The wood was still slightly damp, as if recently carved. He thought it might be the work of another hiker, or maybe a child from some campground, though he hadn't seen anyone else in weeks. He shrugged, put the figure in his jacket pocket, and continued on his way. A week later, he found another one. This time, it was on the front porch railing of the cabin, right beside the door. It was identical to the first. A cold sense of unease settled in his chest. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone had come all the way to his cabin. Someone had stood right outside his door, perhaps while he was sleeping or hiking, and left this silent mark. That night, the silence of the forest no longer felt peaceful. It became heavy, laden with unspoken possibilities. Every snap of a twig in the woods was no longer a deer or a raccoon. It could be a stranger's footstep. He started checking the locks 3 times before going to bed, a habit he'd never had before. The solitude he craved had morphed into a dangerous sense of isolation. The figures continued to appear, one on the firewood pile, another by the old water pump. They were like silent sentinels, signs of a methodical encroachment on his territory. There were no threats, no damage to property, just these strange, unsettling reminders that he was not alone. Someone was watching him, and they wanted him to know it. Elias tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was an eccentric local mountain dweller, someone who didn't like strangers. Or maybe it was an elaborate prank. But the remoteness of the place made those explanations feel absurd. He tried to look for footprints or any other signs of the trespasser, but the thick forest floor of pine needles kept its secrets. This person moved like a ghost. The fear began to eat away at his work. He couldn't concentrate. The words on the page seemed to mock him. He found himself constantly looking out the window, scanning the trees for a movement, a shape that didn't belong. He had come here to escape feeling trapped, but now he felt more besieged than ever. The climax came one night in late October, when an early storm swept through the mountains. The wind wailed like a wounded animal, and the rain lashed against the window panes. The power went out around 9 p.m., plunging the cabin into thick darkness, illuminated only by the flickering light of the fire in the hearth and the flashes of lightning outside. Elias was sitting in his leather armchair, trying to read a book by candlelight, but his mind wouldn't settle. Every creak of the old log cabin was magnified by the storm, turning into an ominous sound. He was just about to fall asleep when he heard it. A soft clink from the front of the cabin. It was different from the wind. It was metallic, distinct. Elias' heart hammered against his ribs. He held his breath, listening. For a few seconds, there was only the roar of the storm. He almost convinced himself he had imagined it. And then he heard another sound, this time unmistakable. The creak of a floorboard in the living room, just outside the small study where he was sitting. Someone was in the house. A complete icy paralysis took hold of him. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was a primal, instinctual reaction. Don't move. Don't breathe. Don't exist. He sat motionless in the dark, his eyes wide, fixed on the black doorway leading to the living room. The storm seemed to fade, and his world shrank to this single room and the unseen threat just beyond it. The seconds stretched into an eternity. He could hear his own heart pounding in his ears. He heard nothing else. No footsteps, no shuffling. Just the heavy silence inside, a complete contrast to the chaos outside. Had they left? Had they just stepped in and then back out? After what felt like a lifetime, a sliver of courage returned. Slowly, without making a sound, he reached out and grabbed the heavy iron poker from the fireplace. It was cold and solid in his shaking hand. He had to do something. He couldn't just sit here and wait. He got up, his muscles tense. He tiptoed to the doorway, moving with a care he never knew he possessed. He peered into the living room. The fireplace cast a faint orange glow on the floor and furniture. The room was empty. The front door was ajar, letting in a gust of cold wind and rain. He had locked that door. He knew he had. A new wave of horror washed over him. They hadn't just gotten inside, they had done it silently. They could have been here for minutes, watching him in the darkness. He quickly relocked the front door, securing the chain bolt as well. He did a sweep of the cabin, his heart still racing, checking every window, every dark corner. Nothing. No one. The house was empty except for him. He returned to the study, feeling a shaky sense of relief but still profoundly rattled. He was about to sit down to try and compose himself when his eyes caught it. On his desk, placed right in the middle of the manuscript he had been meticulously rewriting, was another wooden figure. The cold he had felt before was nothing compared to the icy rush that went through him now. This wasn't just a break-in, it was a message. The stranger hadn't just entered his home, they had entered his most private space, touched his work, and left their mark on the very thing that had brought him here. It was a violation so deep and intimate it was terrifying. Adrenaline replaced paralysis. He no longer cared about the storm or the darkness. He fumbled for his car keys and jacket, stumbled out of the cabin, and sprinted through the rain to his old Jeep. His hands were shaking so badly it took him 3 tries to get the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and he floored the gas, the tires spinning on the muddy dirt road as he sped away in a blind panic. He drove for nearly an hour in the pitch black before he got a sliver of cell phone signal. He pulled over, still shaking, and called 911. The dispatcher's voice was calm and professional, but it did nothing to calm him down. He stammered out his story, the remote cabin, the figures, the break-in. A little while later, a park ranger deputy named Miller met him at a 24-hour gas station. Miller was an older man with a weathered face and eyes that had seen too much. He listened to Elia's story patiently, without interrupting. "We'll check it out," Miller said when Elias was done. "But I have to be honest with you, son. This forest has deep places. There are people who live off the grid, people who don't follow the same rules we do. Finding someone out there, it's like trying to find a specific leaf in a windstorm." They went back to the cabin, the patrol car's headlights cutting through the darkness. The house looked serene and harmless in the rising dawn. Miller did a full search of the premises and the surrounding area. He found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no fingerprints, nothing out of the ordinary except the front door that Elias had left ajar in his panic. The only footprints in the mud were Elias. It was as if the intruder had vanished into thin air. "You sure you didn't imagine it?" Miller asked gently. "This place can put strange thoughts in a man's head." "I didn't imagine this," Elias said, his voice raw. He pointed to the figure on his desk. Miller picked it up, examining it in the light of his flashlight. "I've seen these before," he mumbled. "The old locals call them silent guardians. Superstitious stuff. They say they're left as a warning, to ward off people who don't belong." Elias didn't stay another night. He packed his belongings in a tense silence and left as soon as Miller finished his report. On his drive back to the city, he called Professor Alastair Finch. He told him everything. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Ah," Alastair said finally, his voice holding a strange resignation. "So they're still there. My father used to tell me about them. He said the forest doesn't like to be disturbed, Elias. It has its own protectors. They don't mean you any harm, they just let you know you're not welcome." Elias never went back to that cabin. He never finished the book either. The experience left a scar on his psyche, a lingering fear of silence and wild places. Sometimes at night when he's alone in his apartment, he thinks about that unseen intruder. He can't help but wonder what would have happened if he hadn't heard that creak of the floorboard. What if he had just sat there in the dark, unaware, while a figure stood a few feet away, watching him, deciding if a silent warning was still enough? Story 3. Echoes in the Oak Forest. The air inside Bertha, our affectionate name for Josh's '88 Volkswagen van, was a mix of cold coffee, the pine tree scent from the air freshener hanging on the rearview mirror, and the unavoidable damp smell of 4 bodies crammed into a tight space for 3 days. But to me, it was the smell of freedom. A liberation from my cramped city apartment, from the relentless work emails, and most importantly, from the soul-crushing silence of a recent breakup. This was the medicine I needed. "Liam, it's your turn to pick the music." Chloe's voice came from the back bench, her bare feet propped up on a bulging backpack. Next to her, Maya was engrossed in a book, her dark hair swaying with every bump in the road. "As long as it's not one of your sad indie bands," Josh interjected from the driver's seat, a wry smile on his scruffy face. "We're on an adventure, not a quest for a reason to cry." I laughed, a sound that felt genuine and light. "Don't worry, Captain, it's classic rock tonight." We were somewhere in the rolling hills of the Oregon coast, a strip of land as wild as it was beautiful. The plan was simple: drive until we found the perfect spot to stop, camp for the night, and revel in the absolute quiet. Bertha, our moss-green beast, had been a sturdy, mobile home, a little fortress against the outside world. At least that's what I thought. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with vibrant streaks of orange and purple, Josh turned off the main road onto a rough dirt track he'd found on an old map. The road wound through a forest of old oak trees, their dense canopies almost completely obscuring the last of the daylight. It eventually led us to a small clearing next to a babbling creek. The spot was perfect: quiet, secluded, and completely empty. The silence here was unlike the silence in my apartment. It was alive, filled with the whisper of the wind through the leaves and the sound of the running water. We quickly got to work. Josh and I built a fire while Chloe and Maya prepared dinner, grilled hot dogs and corn. As the flames took hold, dancing and crackling, they cast strange, flickering shadows on the surrounding tree trunks. We huddled together, eating, laughing, and telling old stories. It felt cozy and safe. It was the kind of moment that makes you forget about everything else in the world, a small bubble of perfection. Night fell, bringing a sharp chill. We put out the fire, making sure not a single ember remained, and retreated inside Bertha. Josh and Maya took the 2 bunk beds in the back, while Chloe and I laid our sleeping bags on the converted floor. The van, already cramped, now felt even cozier. I could hear the steady breathing of everyone around me. I locked the side sliding door and double-checked the back. Secure. I drifted off to sleep, feeling content. I don't know how long I had been asleep when a sound woke me. It was very faint, almost imperceptible, a soft tap. I opened my eyes, my heart thumping in my chest. The night outside the window was pitch black. Just a branch falling on the roof, I told myself, or an animal. I closed my eyes again, trying to go back to sleep. And then I heard it again. This time it was clearer. It wasn't on the roof. It was coming from the small window right next to my head. Someone or something was gently tapping on the glass. A shiver of ice ran down my spine. My breath froze in my chest. This wasn't an animal. This was a deliberate, rhythmic knock. I lay perfectly still, my body rigid with fear, like a form of sleep paralysis where I was fully awake. I listened, my ears straining for any other sound. Silence. The silence was now heavy and menacing. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might wake the others. I slowly, as carefully as I could, turned my head toward the window. Through the fogged-up glass, I couldn't make out anything but darkness. I held my breath, waiting. A few minutes passed like an eternity. Nothing happened. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe it was just my exhaustion. I was almost convincing myself of this when a dark shape moved past the front window of the van. It was just a fleeting movement at the edge of my vision, but I was sure I saw it. a human figure. "Josh," I whispered, my voice hoarse with fear. "Josh, wake up." There was no answer. I tried again, a little louder. "Josh." "Huh, what?" His voice was groggy from the back. "There's someone outside," I whispered, trying to keep my voice from shaking. I heard a rustle as he sat up. "What are you talking about, Liam? You must be dreaming." "No, I swear. I heard tapping and saw someone walk past." The entire van fell silent as Josh listened. Chloe and Maya had also stirred awake. "Are you sure?" Maya asked, her voice tinged with anxiety. Before I could answer, we heard another sound. This time, it wasn't a knock. It was a faint scraping of metal against the sliding door. A high-pitched, slow sound, as if someone was using something sharp to feel for the lock. That's when the real panic set in. We were trapped. 4 people in a metal box in the middle of nowhere, and someone was trying to get in. Josh let out a low curse. "Nobody make a sound," he ordered in a sharp whisper. He quietly reached for the aluminum baseball bat he always kept under his seat. We sat there in the dark, holding our breath, listening to the dreadful scraping. It stopped. Then we heard footsteps. Slow, heavy footsteps circling the van. They stopped at the back. A tense, prolonged silence stretched out, so thick I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. A loud thud against the back door made us all jump. Chloe let out a muffled shriek. Someone was trying to break the door down. The force of the blows shook the entire van. Josh was by the back window, trying to peer out. "I can't see anything, it's too dark," he hissed. "Maya, call 911. "There's no signal," she replied, her voice panicked. "I tried already." Of course there was no signal. That's why we had chosen this spot, for its remoteness. That choice now felt like a fatal mistake. The thumping abruptly stopped. The silence returned, even more terrifying than before. We waited, our nerves stretched to their breaking point, not knowing what would happen next. "Did they leave?" Chloe whispered after a moment. No one dared to answer. We continued to sit in silence, listening. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, nothing. "All right," Josh finally said. "I think we need to get out of here, now." "We don't even know if they're still out there," I protested. "If we open the doors." "We don't have a choice, Liam. We can't just sit here and wait for dawn." He was right. The fear of what was waiting outside was horrific, but the prospect of being trapped and helpless was worse. "Okay," Josh said, outlining a quick plan. "Liam, you get in the passenger seat. Maya, Chloe, stay still in the back. I'm going to jump in the driver's seat and start the engine. The second it's on, I'm flooring it. Don't look out, just keep your heads down." We moved as quickly and silently as possible in the cramped space. My palms were slick with sweat as I slid into the passenger seat. Josh took a deep breath, his hand on the keys. "Ready?" he whispered. We nodded in the dark. Josh inserted the key into the ignition and turned it. Bertha's old engine groaned sluggishly before roaring to life with a loud rumble. At the same instant, Josh switched on the headlights. The powerful beams cut through the night, and in one horrifying moment we saw them. Not one person, but 2. They were standing less than 10 meters from the front of the van, right in the middle of the dirt road. They were wearing nothing but tattered, filthy clothes. One was a tall, bald man with empty, hollow eyes. Next to him was a smaller, indeterminate figure, their face obscured by long, matted hair. They just stood there, motionless, caught in the glare of the headlights, like startled animals. There were no weapons in their hands, but there was something far more terrifying about their appearance. A madness, a complete emptiness. They looked at us not with anger or aggression, but with a cold, dispassionate curiosity, as if we were just insects in a jar. Josh didn't hesitate. He put the van in gear and floored the gas pedal. Bertha lunged forward. For a second I thought we would hit them, but at the very last moment they silently stepped aside, letting us pass. As we sped by them, I risked a glance in the rearview mirror. They were still there, motionless silhouettes on the road, watching us until we disappeared into the darkness. Josh didn't slow down until we were back on the main paved road. He drove with a frantic focus, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. None of us said a word for nearly an hour. The only sounds were Bertha's engine and our own ragged breathing. We drove through the night, stopping only when the sun rose at a brightly lit gas station. We looked like ghosts, our eyes wide and our faces pale. We called the police. They sent a patrol to the area, but we knew they wouldn't find anything. The people had vanished into the woods just as mysteriously as they had appeared. We cut our trip short and drove straight home. The freedom I had felt at the beginning was gone, replaced by a lingering sense of dread. Our cozy mobile home, our fortress, had been violated. The safety we thought we had was just an illusion. Months passed and we never found out who those people were or what they wanted. Were they just homeless people living in the woods, or something more sinister? Why did they terrorize us? The questions haunted me. Sometimes at night when I'm in my apartment, I hear that soft tapping in my head again. And I remember those empty eyes, caught in the headlights, staring at me from the shadows of a secluded Oregon forest. And I realize that there are some places in this world where safety is just a concept, and sometimes the monsters aren't just in the stories. They're out there, waiting in the silence.